Hey, what's up guys and welcome back to askNK. This is our weekly rundown of events, updates and beautiful things happening within the Blender community, Blender Foundation and also Blender as an app. And this week we have a huge set of cool stuff that you guys will definitely want to see. Now a couple of tools are back in Blender and they are better, cleaner, and of course you would like to try these ones. So first off, if you go over to the download section, you would notice that Blender 2.91.2 is finally here. So you can definitely go over to the link in the description and download this. So we've already talked about the long-term support and it makes a lot of sense to see that this is actually something that is continuing. So for those who are working with Blender 2.91, you would definitely need to download this version so that you can take a look at some of the bug fixes and get started with it. So with this said, if you also go over to the link in the description where you can download the experimental versions of Blender, you would also notice that right now we only have Blender 2.92 and also Blender 2.93. And this brings us to a couple of things. So first off, we're going to get started by opening up Blender 2.92 and we'll do a little bit of back and forth as many features that are now in 2.93 are quite similar to the things that you'll be getting in 2.92. So with Blender 2.92.0 beta open up right here, you would notice something is here. So the folks at Blender Foundation have restored the add object. Now the add object comes in a very wonderful form and it makes sense because they've also gone ahead to promise that this is a tool that will be coming with Blender 2.92 as it is now stable and it's very clean. So they've done a little bit of cleanup for this stuff and this has actually led to some very nice stuff. And by the way, if you also go over to the second or the third link you're going to find in the description, this will take you to a brand new dedicated section that the folks at Blender Foundation have created, and this deals with the modeling module. So there is a channel that has been made within the Blender chat where you can find some very nice and cool updates. So these are very cool stuff, all right? So you might want to take a look at these ones and you can see what's going on right here. So for those who like to work with geometries, these are some very nice cool stuff. I'm going to put a link in the description by the way, so you can take a look at that. And with this said, let's test out the add object. So this is no longer experimental. It is now confirmed, sealed, as it's going to be something you will get in 2.92 once it gets released. So if you click on this button now, you would notice that we have this very tiny, grid. It has a very nice fall off and we can click, drag and push this backward and add a couple of objects. But I did find out that there are also some very nice tiny tricks that you can use to get some sort of uniform tools. Meanwhile, before you talk about that, you would notice that we have a couple more stuff. So I can click right here and make sure I have this snapped up to this point and drag this all the way. And I did test out something that once you're within a view like this and you would like to change to, change the snapping from geometry to default, you can do that and you can click and drag and you notice it snaps to that grid point and that looks super cool. It's really cool. It's not like it's lost in space or something, contrary to what you get with other apps, 3D Studio Max. Okay, so contrary to what you get with that, this just snaps directly to that particular point. So you can do a lot of cool stuff with this. Now I did find out something that is pretty nice and I think you guys would love this one. So let's play around with this a little bit before I show you guys that. If you select any object at all, so let's say we select the icosphere and if you click and you just click like so, you notice that this is not uniformly scaled. If you tap or hold down shift, it scales this properly and you can now just simply move your mouse up and down and you have that proper scale. Lovely. I love this. All right, so you can do that for every single thing. If you want to do that with a cube, click, hold down shift and you can see that you have that perfect scale. And if you click and hold down shift, you'll notice they have that perfect uniform scale. So this is going to be very useful and I do know that lots of people will find this one very interesting. Now with this said, let's talk about something about the UI that has also been updated. Actually, this UI thingy that has been updated deals more with modifiers, okay? Which I think we need to fire Blender 2.93 as there are some other updates that is coming with this. So we've already talked about the fact that the asset browser is not coming with Blender 2.92, but we will definitely be seeing something like that in 2.93 as this is actually on the works at this point, as this is seen as a tentative tool to add directly into Blender right now. So what I'm going to do next is just push some things across and show you guys a pretty nice tool with the physics. So if, for example, I go in here and bring out the icosphere, for example, so let's hold down shift and do that, and also get this one happening there. And I would like to get a simulation going across. So previously, you guys might have noticed that when you add things like the collision modifier, you cannot actually, mute that collision modifier. So if, for example, I go over here and click right, or let's select all of these ones, okay? So if I select all of these and I add a collision modifier, I cannot mute the collision modifier. And it's even crazier because sometimes you would want to do things like so. So let's actually apply that, all right? That's the only thing you could do. If I add a cloth and I choose to test out this cloth, you would notice that we just have this collision happening. Now, in the previous versions of Blender, how you can mute the collision was just simply by going over here and hitting the apply button, but all of that is changed now. So you can now easily mute this stuff. And how do you do that? Now, if you add a collision to any object and you like to mute it so that you can do some further investigation in your model or on your model, you can simply go all the way down to where we have our physics, and right here you can turn this off. So if I turn that off and press the playback button, you would notice that it drives right through, bounces back, turn this on, press the playback button, and you notice that bounce. All right, so this is really cool. We've also talked about some other updates that deals with the modifier as well. For example, if you go in and add things like a subdivision, that right now you can make some selections like so and select the last one, click right here and copy to selected. All right, so we've talked about this one sometime last week. So in case you're following the channel, you probably know about this. But then there is also a very new nice update that I would like to share with you guys. And that update has to do with the cloth. All right, so we've already added the cloth, so let's talk about that. So how this works is actually very nice. So this in its sense works in a very interesting way. And how that works is you can now easily add vertex group and exclude those vertex groups from object collision. So for you to see that in action, what you need to do is select the object that you want, press the tab key, and I'm going to tap Z on the keyboard, switch over to wireframe, and then because I'm within the vertex, I would select a certain part. So now I've selected this part, I can now go over to where I have my vertex group and click on the plus sign and hit the word assign. And this way I have added the vertex group right there. So if I press the tab key and tap Z and switch back to solid, you would notice that nothing changes, because if we go ahead and press the playback button, nothing changes. The reason why we did all of that was to create the vertex group. So if we now go over to where we have our physics and we scroll all the way down. So let's do that. If we scroll all the way down, you notice that we have something called collision. So we can now go over to the collision section and now add a vertex group which we want not to have collisions. So that way we're excluding that vertex group from collision. So if I press the playback button, first time you notice we have collision happening there. Actually, let's make this smooth so that you guys can see it in all of its glory. Okay, so let's press the playback. Okay, that's cool. So if we click now and go over to groups and then press the playback button again, you would notice that it syncs right in, and this could be very useful. I mean, you could use this for a lot of cases. So let's wipe all of this out and take a look at one good example. So for this example, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and scale this over to a point like so, and then we will add ourselves some grid. So you probably have done some tablecloth stuff before, or maybe you want to play with tablecloth stuff. Okay, so what can you do? We can press the tab key, right click and subdivide this, and then we can switch this all the way to this part and make a selection. So I can select this part as well, and then if I go over to the vertex group, I can click on the plus sign and assign. And of course you can double click and name this whatever you want. I can name this table, for example, and then click on the word assign. So by simply assigning that, I can dive all the way back and I can choose to select the object which I want to have as a collider, or in this case our table, make that a collision, select this object, and then make this a cloth. And once I make that a cloth, bounce this all the way back, press the playback button, you notice we have this cloth. So if I would like to get that feature right there, what I can do is we can go all the way to where we have physics, scroll all the way down to where we have collisions, click on this button, and then add the table. So this way, that table is not going to be part of the collision. And this could be very nice if maybe you want to have maybe some sort of cloth thing dripping on some sides, and you don't really want to have this particular part having that simulation. All right, so you're just going to save yourself some time, and you can now notice that this now syncs right in. So pretty cool stuff from the folks at Blender Foundation. and I'm particularly happy about this one. While speaking about things that I'm happy about, there is a very tiny modifier. Now this modifier update is for those working with grease pencil, so you probably haven't seen that, so let's go ahead so I can show you. And if I hold down Shift and tap A on the keyboard, we can go over to what we have as grease pencil right here, and I can select stroke. So how this one works is it's a very tiny update, all right? It's a very tiny update, but it looks good. So how this works, or what this is an offset that has been added to the modifier. So if we go over to the modifier and click right here and go over to noise, nothing happens, right? But then if we choose to increase the scale of the noise, you notice that we have this. Of course, maybe you might be saying, oh, we can animate with that, but then the folks at Blender Foundation have just added an offset. So in this way, you can play with this offset. And this works for a lot of things, okay? So regardless of what you have, as far as a grease pencil stroke, you can definitely have this one. For those that are looking at ways that they can play with things like this is something really nice. And with that said, let's talk about the geometry node. So last week, we talked about the fact that they've added the point rotate, they've added the point scale, and also point translate. And lots of you guys were like, why not just show us what this does? And that's why we're looking at that now. So for this, I'm just going to go ahead and drag a simple grid all the way out, and I could, you know, press tab on the keyboard and subdivide that. It doesn't really matter though. So we have this tiny box right here. So how this one works is it's pretty simple. So for this, I need to click on this object, go all the way up, click right here, go over to geometry nodes, okay, and I can click on new, and that would apply the geometry node to this object in form of a modifier. So with this modifier here, we can start doing some very nice stuff. So the very first set of things which I would like to show you guys is that at any time you like to add points, you can simply type in the word point. So let's actually go in here. So you can do that by going over to point and add a simple point distribute. All right, and if you also go over to the point section, you'll notice that we have the rotate scale and also we have the translate. So we're going to talk about these ones right now, and how you can work with this is very nice. I know this is going to be very useful for those who would want to do things like motion graphics and stuff. And for those who are also intending to, you know, scatter things around, you want to randomize the things that you have in your viewport or in your nodes, you can also work with this one as well. So by simply going right here, I would want to also bring a point instance. So let's grab that point instance right there, and I'm going to click on this button and attach this cube. So the cube is actually what I want to scatter across the grid. So let's zoom all the way out, and you'd notice this is a massive stuff. Okay, this is really massive. So how do we get, you know, how do we get even with this one? So how we can get even with this is by simply adding a very tiny scale. So I'm just going to drop the scale in between there, and you'd notice that nothing is happening. Now for us to get something happening, I need to click here and go over to vector, and then I can start scaling this down. So I can choose to scale this to like 0.2, 0.2, or 0.2. all right, this is not bad. Or you can throw in a value. So I can go over here and type in the word value and drive the entire thing by simply using a value. So now we can make this smaller, we can make this, you know, bigger, however we want. And this is lovely. Now with this in mind, if you now go over to where you have your points, okay, so for those asking, if you go over to the point section, this rotate now gives you the option of having multiple stuff, or, you know, cool stuff like this scattered across a particular geometry, but then you can now rotate these things to your heart content. All right, so you can choose to rotate these as objects, one, or you can rotate them as points, and you can also rotate them based off these two methods, either as axis angular or Euler. All right, so at this point you can now have that randomness that you're looking for. And just like what we talked about, you know, this other time, you can choose to drive this. So we can choose to drive this by simply using a value. But depending on what you like to achieve, you can get some good stuff with this. Now, lots of you guys might also be asking about this density stuff. You might have seen it in a couple of places. You don't know how this works. I will show you how you can do that. Before we do that, let's also make sure that we can see the things that we have. So I'm just going to get the join geometry, add that right there, click from here and connect this so we can be able to see them both. Now at any point in time you want to scale this stuff, of course you can. All right, of course you can. So let's also bring this down 0.0, let's say 3. That doesn't look bad. Okay, and if you go over to these parts, so let's talk about this distribution. If you go over to the distribution, you can increase the distribution that you want, which isn't bad. And you can also play with the seed. Now with this, you can do some very nice stuff. All right, so for those who want to do some cool stuff with this, you can also use this to do some cool stuff. But then for the density, how the density works is also simple. So for this density, we can choose to select some parts. So I can select some parts like so. So let's just make sure that we're looking at this from the top view, and I can select some parts like this, and this is where I want things to be scattered across. So if I simply select these parts, all right, so if I simply select these parts and say this is where I want things to be scattered, I need to go over to our vertex, click right here and click on assign. So by this time, you know the gist that once you come over to this part and type in the word group, that we would have everything scattered just around that point. So I can now go ahead and press tab on the keyboard, and you know, it doesn't matter how much stuff I have, it will just try as much as possible to restrain itself just within that place. All right, so we can have as much stuff going in like so, and we can also now play with this. So you can now get some cool rotations, and we can dial the scale all the way down to, let's say, 2, and you can see some nice stuff that you can do for yourself. And you can scatter these things across several stuff. It doesn't really matter. I mean, several surfaces and stuff like that. So for those who like to test this thing out, this is, you know, this is some cool stuff that you can do. They've also added some very nice things like the attribute vector mat, and I guess they've also added one other stuff which I haven't tried out. I think is align rotate to vector. I haven't tried this one out. Probably I'll try it out and, you know, get back to you guys about it. But then if you want to try it out, you can also use this for some very lovely distribution and also to scatter things across your viewport. The folks at Blender Foundation have also started out to seek for ideas for the Google Summer of Code for 2021. So just in case you have a cool idea for maybe cycles rendering, modeling, shading, you know, the UI, physics, audio, and so on and so forth, you can now simply reach out to these folks and, you know, give them some ideas and tell them what you want and tell them the kind of features that you would like to see. And at the same time, they've also started adding some cool improvements to how the socket color and how these things actually work directly in your viewport. So for those who like to render with cycles, right now they've upgraded to Optics SDK version 7.1. And for sure, those who would like to work with these and you're working with your NVIDIA, this simply means that your NVIDIA drivers version needs to be 450 all the way to the most recent driver that is available right now when you go over to NVIDIA. And in terms of performance, they've also improved how files that are uncompressed Blender files will be able to be read directly in Blender. Now, while we're looking at things that has been improved and things that are yet to get better, Pablo, on the other hand, hasn't actually done a lot of updates that is visible, but he has been teasing a lot of cool stuff. So for those who are, you know, interested in sculpting with Blender, Pablo is doing some very nice stuff. There are some cool tools that will be coming over to Blender very soon, as you can now easily do some quick pattern clothes directly in Blender by simply playing with the cloth filter and using the expand face select and, you know, some other cool things that he has been implementing. On the other hand, he has also added some expand operators for those who like to, you know, do some very styled stuff. And at every single time that you're working with this, he is also looking at ways that there is going to be an operator key that you can be working with. As right now, he has only tweeted that this key is an R key that is being pressed and the operator starts expanding all over again once you're working with it. And these are some very lovely and interesting updates that is available right now from the folks at Blender Foundation. And of course, if you like to work with Blender, link is going to be in the description to tons of cool and amazing stuff. Meanwhile, while we speak about amazing stuff, there are some very nice tools that you might want to consider getting. Now, you know how things can get populated in your scene, slows your scene down. Right now, the folks at Strike Digital have released this add-on, which is called Alpha 3. I'm probably going to purchase this and, you know, test it out so that you guys can see how it works. And how this one it works is more like you can work with 2D cards right now and populate your entire scene, and probably you can bake some stuff and get cool stuff happening for you. Now, with this said, if you also want to get some percentage off, the folks at Transportation, they now have the Transportation version 2.2 available. So in case you've purchased Transportation before, or maybe you want to purchase this, they've included a couple of extra assets and they have a 10% off that is available right now. So if you would like to get this, link is also going to be in the description. And while we're talking about this, we already did a video about Pure Sky and it's a beautiful add-on for those who like to get some very nice skyline for their next render. And they've just released the version 3.1, and this is a very nice tool set that you can have. Pure Sky itself includes the sun, moon, planets, stars, volumetric cloud, atmospheric fog, and also those beautiful things that you would want to get within your scene while working directly in Blender. So if any of this stuff interests you, link is going to be in the description, and that's definitely going to be about it. Amazing cool stuff, tons of news and tons of updates available just in a span of 1 week. And I'm very, grateful to the folks at Blender Foundation for making this possible. So tell me what you guys think about this in the comment section. And of course, if you like this video or you learned something from this, you can go ahead and give it a like, and don't forget to share with a friend. And if you're new here, it's going to be amazing for you to hit the subscribe button and also turn on notifications so that you don't miss the next video or the next update. And until I see you guys again with a tutorial update, Free Friday, Tutorial Tuesday, tips and tricks, things like this. Peace.